viva la revolución, que viva, que siga, que viva la revolución, que siga, revolución.
Thank you for the reflection, for inviting me and to give the opportunity to share this panel with Kim and Sally. Well, I'm from Mexico, as you heard, but I'm going to make my discussion about the problems of the situation of women in Latin America in general. So as we don't have a lot of time, the topics I'm going to cover are a bit general, but if we have time for discussions, we can go deeper in some of the issues. Yeah, I will show some images that are not necessarily too related to exactly everything I'm going to say, but just to have some visuals there. So I took the topic of the seminar on the frontline, women and the struggle for liberation in Latin America. So when we look to the situation of women in Latin America today, the scene seems both encouraging and disgraceful. It is true that in different spheres, women have succeeded in achieving both professional and political recognition. Many top professionals are women, and we even have female presidents like Michelle Bachelet, that just finished their term, Cristina Kirchner, and the recently elected president of Costa Rica. For the urban middle classes, access to education and paid professional jobs have dramatically increased in the last 40 years. However, the highest proportion of people living under the poverty line are women and their children. The majority of people displaced for the internal conflict, like in the case of Colombia, are women. Women continue to be brutally killed in the northern and southern borders of Mexico, in some of the most cruel expressions of hate against women. All the mentioned situations are abbreviated by the fact of being poor, black, indigenous, and especially for being women. In most countries, abortion continues to be penalized, and women have little decision-making over the decision-making power over their own bodies and lives. In this briefly mentioned context, the discussion about feminism today, about women liberation, should be a priority. We could spend entire seminars discussing the different tendencies and paths of feminism, of feminist theories as well, particularly in the Western world. But for us in Latin America, the discussion is focused on the distinction between what a bourgeois feminism means and what, opposing to the socialist feminism for women in Latin America and in the Third World. The first mentioned, the bourgeois feminism, in very general lines, advocates for our rights to continue to be part of a system of exploitation, to be CEOs in multinational companies, or to participate in genocidal war against other peoples. A feminism that shows that Margaret Thatcher, a woman, can be as neoliberal or more than her counterpart Ronald Reagan, or that she's capable of leading to unemployment of thousands of workers regardless of their gender. A feminism that portrays this famous Lindy England torturing and abusing Iraqi prisoners in Abu Ghraib. But on the other hand, the socialist feminism, or movement for women liberation, as we call it in Latin America, fights for human rights, culture, and economic rights for women, for the protection of the environment, and for a life free of violence of all kinds. I will now comment on 4 experiences that, in my opinion, mark a turning point in the women liberation movement in our continent. So I'm going to mention just these 4 examples that are 4 of very many examples we could analyze in different seminars. So, building equality in the resistance from below, the Zapatista experience. In the eve of 1994, in the mountains of southern Mexico, an army made up of indigenous people took several municipalities demanding to be heard. The fact that an army of indigenous can generally ignore and minimize along 500 years of colonization got together was already surprising for most of us. More surprising was the fact that a high percentage of them were women, including an important proportion of their central military command. And soon after, we learned that since March 1993, a year before the uprising, the Zapatista women came together and moved forward a revolutionary law for women's rights. That is called the Ley Revolucionaria de Mujeres, that was accepted by the highest command of the EZLN, the Zapatista army. They demanded the right to participate in the revolutionary struggle. They demanded the right to paid work with adequate wages, the right to decide when and who to marry, because it's very common in indigenous cultures and in many other cultures as well, that the family decides who they want to marry, and Zapatista women say, no, we want to decide if we want to marry, with whom, and when do we want to do it. They demanded the right to, a right that the rest of women in Mexico don't have. So that's the right to decide how many children they want to have and how many children they could look after properly. In the Zapatista communities, women run a big proportion of the production system and the economy, not only domestically, but in local and community levels. In the Zapatista communities, young women are free to decide what they want to do and how they want to be useful for their communities. So they decide what they want to be. Women are elected as representatives as well. It has been a very long and difficult struggle to change cultural and patriarchal patterns, to change centuries of repression, exploitation, and illiteracy. Those women, wearing their balaclavas or not, as we know them from pictures and films, stopped with their hands the army coming into their communities. They held arms during the uprising, and most importantly, they are building their communities together with men and children. Women like Comandanta Susana, or our very beloved Comandanta Ramona, who was the first indigenous woman in talking in front of the racist Mexican parliament, addressing all Mexico on national TV. Just imagine this short, dark indigenous woman wearing her traditional costume, addressing the Mexican people in Spanish with a very strong Tzotzil accent, talking about indigenous rights, for sovereignty, and for a better society, not only for her and her people, but for the whole Mexican society. So this is just a few images of the Zapatista women. That's Comandanta Ramona. She passed away due to cancer. She's a very important figure in the Zapatista movement, even now. Yeah, women are a big part of the movement, which is quite exemplar for the situation of Mexico.